Donald Trump just turned a standard legislative signing ceremony into a live prosecution of Nancy Pelosi, trapping her in the front row while he dismantled her financial empire in front of 11 million viewers. She walked into the executive mansion expecting a routine 20-minute photo opportunity, a quick handshake, a ceremonial pen stroke, and a swift ride home, but she was dead wrong. Instead of sitting down at the historic desk, the president stepped straight to the podium, unsealed a leather folder, and hijacked the monitors in the East Room to broadcast her private financial disclosures live on every major network on television. He displayed every single trade, every specific date, and every precise dollar amount, laying out a staggering net worth of $649 million built by a public servant pulling a $174,000 annual salary over 39 years in office. Looking her right in the eyes, he delivered the kill shot, stating that even a guy like him with decades in high-stakes finance could not make those numbers make logical sense. She could not just stand up and walk out, leaving a ceremony for a bill she publicly championed would tell the entire world she had something to hide. So she was forced to sit there, anchored to her chair in the front row, while the commander-in-chief read her family's stock trades like a list of federal charges. The heaviest part of the trap was that every single number he put on that screen was verifiable public record. And she knew it, and the 11 million people watching at home knew she knew it. The room was packed to the walls with 200 political insiders, powerful committee chairs, and lawmakers desperate for camera time. And protocol had placed the former speaker front and center on the left side, directly in the unblinking line of fire for every broadcast lens in the room. Dressed in a navy Chanel suit and her trademark pearls, she sat with the rigid posture of a veteran who had survived more high-stakes Washington setups than most people could even imagine. Her spine was straight, her chin was level, and her hands were folded perfectly in her lap. Nearly 4 decades in the Capitol had taught her exactly how to freeze her face so nobody could ever read her internal calculus. And she was using every ounce of that discipline now. When Trump walked in, he bypassed the signing desk entirely. He carried a premium leather folder instead of a standard manila envelope, proving that in this tier of the political game, even the props carry a distinct weight and message. He worked the room with ease, calling it a beautiful day and stating they were gathered to make sure the people who write the laws do not get to break them. It was a simple, undeniable setup, and the room applauded right on cue. She applauded too, because she had to. The legislation banning congressional stock trades actually carried her name, a piece of reform she had never successfully managed to kill behind closed doors. Every time she clapped her hands together, she was performing a tiny, agonizing act of self-incrimination, yet she never once broke character. But before he put ink to the paper, Trump hit the brakes. He told the crowd they needed to understand exactly why this specific rule mattered so much. He looked around the room and noted that some very important, long-serving individuals sitting right there had spent significantly more time playing the stock market than writing actual legislation. Her smile held up like a reinforced seawall taking a heavy hit, but out of sight from the front cameras, her left hand gripped the sharp edge of her seat and pushed down hard. Out in the hallway, Marcus Whitfield, the chief of staff who had engineered her schedule for 20 years through multiple presidencies and 11,000 public appearances, felt his phone buzz in his pocket. He texted the Secret Service liaison asking for a timeline on the event, and the reply came back in a flash, stating it was open-ended and the president controlled the room. Marcus stared at his screen with a sinking feeling. For 2 solid decades, he had never put her in a room without a concrete exit plan, and today, he had nothing at all. Trump did not rely on a teleprompter or a laptop. He held up a printed financial disclosure form and waved it at the press pool like a guy refusing to pay a rigged tab. He started the show with Visa, casually praising the company before the large screens lit up with hard data. The text showed that on July 1st, 2024, her husband dumped 2,000 shares, cashing out somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million. Then the second line hit. Exactly 85 days later, on September 24th, the Justice Department slapped Visa with an antitrust lawsuit, and the stock tanked 5.5%. Trump hammered the math, stressing that it was 85 days, not 85 years. The husband unloads up to $1 million in stock. The feds make their move, and the valuation drops. Every normal guy holding Visa in a standard retirement account takes a beating, but that one specific political family walks away clean, cashing out nearly 3 months before the rest of the country gets the bad news. He paused, stared down at the front row, and locked onto her eyes. Then he pulled out the standard, rehearsed excuse her office always relies on, mocking the idea that she personally owns 0 stocks and possesses 0 knowledge of her husband's trades. He chewed on the words, laughing at the sheer absurdity of the setup. He pointed out that 2 people can live in the same house, eat dinner at the exact same table, and sleep in the exact same bed, yet she magically knows nothing about millions of dollars moving around right under her roof. He called it the best excuse he had ever heard, and the room broke into a wave of nervous, shifting laughter. Her smile was no longer a smile. It had morphed into a rigid physical stance, like a concrete dam trying to hold back a volume of water it was never built to handle. Trump then dropped the comedy act, his voice going flat and direct. He introduced Harold Bergstrom, a 71-year-old man from Dearborn, Michigan, who had put in 42 years of hard labor at a Ford assembly plant. Harold retired in 2019 and bought blue-chip stocks because the financial experts told him they were safe, and one of those stocks was Visa. The exact day the federal government sued the company, Harold bled out $4,200. Trump made the numbers real, explaining that those funds represented Christmas presents for the grandkids and the budget to fix a kitchen roof that leaked heavily whenever it rained. He connected the dots, stating her husband grabbed his cash 85 days before Harold took the hit, all because Harold did not have the distinct privilege of eating dinner with the Speaker of the House. Trump turned the page of his folder slowly, dragging out the moment, fully aware that the broadcast cameras were zooming in tight on her face. He moved on to Google, showing that in December 2022, the husband unloaded 30,000 shares. Exactly 1 month later, the Justice Department sued Google for antitrust violations. Trump laid out the timeline with brutal clarity. 1 month he sells 30,000 shares, and 30 days later, the hammer drops. He offered the room the only 2 logical options, stating that either this man possesses the greatest natural market instincts in the history of Wall Street, or somebody shared highly classified information between the salad and the main course. He grinned, genuinely enjoying himself, and invited her husband to call him for investment advice, loudly claiming he needed that kind of superior guidance. The crowd laughed again, but the atmosphere in the front row was shifting. She did not break, because a politician does not survive decades of ruthless political combat, multiple impeachments, and the most intense scrutiny on earth by breaking. The change was much quieter. The warmth simply drained out of her face the way daylight leaves a room when a storm rolls in. Her hands stayed perfectly folded, her back stayed perfectly straight, but the strategist operating behind those pearls was running the numbers, and the math was telling her there was no way out. Trump slowed his pace down, stripping away the remaining punchlines. He brought up NVIDIA, praising the company before the screen filled with a long, complex sequence of trades. This was not just 2 lines of text, it was a heavy cascade of call options worth millions of dollars. He broke down the mechanics of congressional power, reminding the room that the Speaker controls the floor schedule and single-handedly decides when a bill lives or dies. He pointed to the CHIPS and Science Act, a bill pushing $52 billion to semiconductor firms, which passed the chamber under her direct watch. The stock went through the roof, and her husband was already holding a heavily leveraged position. He let the silence stretch out before stating that on Wall Street, they throw you in federal prison for that exact behavior, but in Congress, they brand it as public service. The room lost its mind. It was the distinct sound of people finally hearing the quiet part said out loud into a microphone with 11 million witnesses watching. Her hands were flat on her lap now, pressing down hard. She was not shaking, but she was locked into a state of total controlled motionlessness. 39 years of dictating the terms of every room she entered, and now she was pinned to a chair, and the millions of people watching understood exactly what that stillness meant. Trump stopped smiling entirely. For 45 seconds, he went dead serious, sounding exactly like an auditor reading a bankruptcy filing. There were no nicknames, no jokes, just cold, hard mathematics. He announced he was going to do the kind of math Harold Bergstrom does when he checks his depleted retirement account. He noted the congressional pay sits at $174,000 a year, and the speaker pay sits at $223,000. Offering to be generous, he applied the higher leadership salary across her entire 39-year career, resulting in a total lifetime government compensation of roughly $8.7 million before taxes. Then he dropped the anvil, stating her estimated net worth was sitting at $649.7 million. He looked down at her with the calculating expression of a real estate developer who knows exactly how money scales, staring at a financial ledger that defies every known law of economic gravity. He stated that $649 million minus $8.7 million leaves a remainder of over $641 million. Leaning into the microphone, he asked a simple, direct question, demanding to know exactly where that $641 million came from. The room went dead silent. Nobody laughed. 200 people in the room and 11 million viewers at home were executing the exact same mental subtraction at the exact same time, and they all arrived at the exact same conclusion. That kind of wealth does not materialize from a government paycheck. He reminded the crowd that Harold put in 42 years at Ford, clocking in and clocking out every single day, and retired with a total nest egg of $340,000. That figure represented an entire American life of sweat and labor. He pointed out that she generated more wealth than Harold's entire existence in a single afternoon trading NVIDIA options. Trump got his swagger back, but it carried a much heavier weight now. He acknowledged his own billionaire status, pointing out that he built his fortune on tangible assets like hotels and commercial buildings that people can physically touch and walk inside. He asked where her buildings were, highlighting the reality that she owned no physical infrastructure. Her empire consisted entirely of numbers moving across a digital screen, and those numbers magically always went up at the exact perfect moment. She finally spoke up. She had to. This is a woman who spent 2 decades wrangling hostile political factions, pushing heavy legislation through divided chambers, and famously ripping up a State of the Union address on live television. She was not programmed to sit in silence while someone backed her into a corner. She looked straight at the nearest broadcast camera, intentionally ignoring Trump at the podium, because decades in the game had taught her that controlling the lens means controlling the narrative. She stated the president was entitled to his theater, but she was sitting there because she genuinely supported the law. She threw up her standard firewall, claiming her husband made his investment decisions independently. Everything was perfectly legal, and every form was filed right on time. She declared she had nothing to hide, framing her physical presence in that front row chair as definitive proof of her innocence. The room stirred, and her carefully placed supporters offered polite applause. It was a flawless defensive move. Stating she was there pushed the psychological angle that a guilty person would never willingly sit in the front row of their own public prosecution. It was the absolute best card she had left to play, and she dropped it right on beat. Trump did not flinch. He looked genuinely thrilled, like a guy who just watched his opponent walk right into the final tripwire. He said that because she claimed to have nothing to hide, he believed her, and to show his deep respect, he wanted to share something special with the room. He turned the final page in the leather folder. The large monitor split into 2 columns featuring 12 distinct rows. Legislation dates sat on the left, trade dates sat on the right. 6 years of congressional action. Every single time the lucrative trade happened right after the legislative move. It never happened before, and it never happened at random. He read off 5 of them slowly, letting each hit sink in. The CHIPS Act committee vote triggered NVIDIA options. A tech antitrust hearing triggered Google shares being dumped right before a lawsuit. An artificial intelligence bill triggered Tempest AI options. An electric vehicle vote triggered Tesla options. A routine regulatory review triggered Visa shares being liquidated exactly 85 days before the feds attacked. 12 perfect hits out of 12 attempts. He noted that in professional baseball, hitting perfectly every time makes you a legend. But on Wall Street, executing that flawlessly is statistically impossible. Yet, in Washington, they brand that mathematical impossibility as honorable public service. She said nothing at all. The woman who built a legacy on always having the last word, the legendary counterpuncher who could verbally shut down any room on earth, went totally silent. It was not the silence of defeat, it was the terrifying silence of a grandmaster who had rapidly modeled every possible verbal response and realized that anything she said would sound infinitely worse than the 12 lines of data glowing on that screen. Trump signed the reform bill using 2 pens. He placed the leather folder flat on the desk, slid it toward her section of the front row, and offered her a copy for her historical records. She refused to touch it. The folder sat there unclaimed on the edge of the mahogany desk for the final 7 minutes of the broadcast. 3 separate cameras locked onto it from 3 different angles. The image of that premium leather folder containing her entire financial history, extended toward her and visually rejected, became the most viral political photograph of the decade within 6 hours. When the ceremony ended, she bypassed the main exit where the press pool was stacked deep with cameras and microphones. She slipped out through a discreet side door normally reserved for catering staff and people trying to avoid being seen. In 39 years of dominating the Capitol, she had never once used a service exit. She always walked out the front because the front is exactly where the power resides. Taking the quiet way out on this specific night was the real story. Marcus walked rapidly beside her, analyzing the fallout. He had seen her win ugly fights and rebuild after heavy losses, but he had never seen her walk like this. It was a highly accelerated march toward a getaway vehicle they had called for early, and calling the car early was a glaring admission that they had lost total control of the environment. Her heels struck the marble floors in a frantic, erratic rhythm, and in their high-stakes world, a new rhythm always signaled catastrophic danger. She did not speak in the hallway, she did not speak in the SUV, and she did not speak on the drive to the tarmac. Marcus sat in the back seat and watched the most verbally lethal operator in American politics stare blankly out a tinted window at a city she used to own, saying nothing at all. His phone screen displayed 43 missed urgent texts, but he ignored them all. He had already done the brutal math when those 12 lines hit the screen. Within 3 days, 3 specific video clips registered 62 million views, becoming the biggest political media event of the year. The first clip featured the president stating even he couldn't make her numbers work, wrapping a devastating attack inside a heavy brag about his own business skills. The right amplified it as a victory, the finance sector shared it as dark comedy, and the progressive accounts tried to debunk it only to realize the math was entirely accurate. The second clip focused purely on the 12 for 12 data board, pulling 22 million views. People took screenshots, built charts, printed the data out, and physically taped it to office walls across the country. It was a simple, undeniable piece of paper that no political operative could successfully spin. The third clip captured the refused folder on the desk, pulling 19 million views and instantly spawning a cultural meme. Her energy became the new slang for dodging accountability for a disaster everyone knows you created. By week 1, her communications team dropped a tightly constructed 2-sentence statement, marking the shortest defensive release of her entire career. They accused the administration of cheap theater and swore she followed the rules, but they strategically failed to contest a single number. They ignored the visa timeline, they ignored the Google dump, and they ignored the 12 for 12 record. In Washington, aggressively defending the paperwork while ignoring the facts means you have already lost the war. The financial media took over the narrative. The Wall Street Journal ran the numbers and verified the exact same highly suspicious pattern. Bloomberg brought in quantitative analysts who calculated the odds of pulling off 12 perfect post-legislation trades like that were roughly 1 in 31,000. CNBC put a former regulatory lawyer on television who flatly stated that if any private citizen had executed those trades, they would have been investigated years ago. 14 senators scrambled to co-sponsor the reform bill in just 5 days, not because they liked the president, but because they did not want to explain why they defended stock trading after 62 million voters watched that screen expose the game. Entering week 2, the husband abruptly stopped trading. No new disclosure forms were filed, no complex options were purchased, and no new shares were acquired. The specific portfolio that consistently beat the market and crushed elite hedge fund managers finally went entirely dark. His legal team blamed an abundance of caution due to media heat, which is sanitized lawyer code for stopping the exact behavior that is getting you destroyed in the press. Regulators quietly opened a preliminary review looking at trading patterns tied to a lawmaker. They did not name her officially because everyone in the financial sector already knew who they were targeting. 2 asset management firms dumped a popular tracker fund designed to copy her exact trades, pulling $130 million away from retail investors who were just trying to piggyback her wins. The firms called it a reputational risk. When Wall Street executives publicly decide your name is too toxic for business, the crisis is no longer a political issue. It is a matter of undeniable math. By week 3, she officially confirmed she would not seek re-election. She had hinted at it before, but making it official exactly 21 days after that room told the entire unwritten story. Her statement talked about public service and passing the torch, making zero mention of the trades, the 12 for 12 board, or the folder she refused to touch. But the timing was the only truth that mattered. By month 2, the bill became federal law. There was a second signing, but no show this time, and she was nowhere to be seen. Lawmakers and their spouses were permanently locked out of trading individual stocks. The law was officially named the Preventing Elected Leaders from Owning Securities and Investments Act, permanently etching her acronym into federal code. That was her legacy now. Not the gavel, not the heavy healthcare fights, just 12 trades on a screen and the deafening quiet that followed. On the 21st night after the broadcast, Harold Bergstrom stood in his Dearborn garage at 9 in the evening. His Ford truck was jacked up and the alternator was entirely shot. It was a tough 3-hour repair job, but he knew how to do it. The lights hummed overhead, and the radio stayed off because he didn't want to hear the news in his sanctuary. When his son called from out of town, Harold wiped the heavy grease off his hands and answered. His son asked if he saw the video. Harold confirmed he saw it. He had watched those 12 lines 4 separate times, pausing the playback on the Visa data to run the brutal arithmetic in his head. He already knew the score, 85 days. A heavy sell-off. His own $4,200 loss. Christmas money and a roof patch gone in an instant. He told his son he saw her sell 85 days before he took the hit. The line went totally quiet. It was the specific kind of heavy quiet that sits between a working-class guy and his kid when the system they built their lives around is proven on live television to be rigged against them. The son wanted to talk about justice, but Harold already knew those words: do not fix a broken truck or put cash back in a decimated retirement fund. He told his boy he was fixing the truck and hung up. He put the phone down next to a rusted can of oil, grabbed the heavy alternator, found the right bolt, and got back to work. Inside his quiet house, his quarterly statement sat on the kitchen table. The Visa line, bleeding red ink, dated the exact day the feds sued the company the insider dumped months ago. Next to the paper sat cold coffee, a television remote, and a brass pin from Ford marking 30 years of service, the only tangible thing he ever got for showing up and doing the work. Outside, the Dearborn streets were dark, the plant was quiet, and the night shift was permanently dead. The neighborhood felt heavy, the way places feel when the money leaves, and the people left behind cannot afford to run. $649 million generated on a standard government paycheck. 12 perfect trades executed with zero blowback. And Harold, armed with 42 years of sweat, $340,000 to his name, a broken truck, and hands that permanently smelled like industrial grease, was exactly who he always was. He was the guy left holding the bill.